Information is a word that seems to be long forgotten by the mainstream American media. Instead, what viewers have been receiving are opinions from people far away from events on the ground, but close to a political agenda that fluctuates depending on what kind of impact occurring world events can have on America.
In the opposition, as far as I understand it, the Muslim Brotherhood is not participating, and you see lots of different parties.
After 30 years of vacancy, the post of Vice President of Egypt has been finally filled. President Mubarak nominated his Chief of Intelligence, Omar Suleiman, in a bid to save his own presidency.
Well, alJazeera will be continuing to defy reporting restrictions in Egypt to bring you full coverage of the crisis from our team of journalists, both on air and online.
Hamas is firmly entrenched in Gaza. It's been in power here for 4 years, and it alone is in charge of the street. Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's Egypt's banned opposition group. So it could benefit a great deal if the Muslim Brotherhood becomes a rising political force in Egypt. Last week, Hamas arrested anti-Mubarak protesters in Gaza.
They put me in one of the rooms, they closed the door, just me, and they hit me in my head, in my face, and they said we didn't take decision to support this revolution from Gaza.
The Muslim Brotherhood poses more questions for the international community than it does answers. They have been banned in Egypt, and they raise alarm bells to observers of what is going on here, because increasingly it is felt that these protests and these demonstrations have taken an Islamist and almost extremist chant on the streets of Cairo. I explored this phenomenon earlier in this package.
It didn't get more than a passing mention in the mainstream media. Hezbollah, Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood members in a jailbreak.
They escaped from here and went to Lebanon. There's no way to go to Lebanon from Egypt, only to go through the sea or to fly.
So who helped them? Any one of the thousands of protesters on Egypt's streets. Support for the demonstrators has fled fast, and although the Muslim Brotherhood, the country's largest opposition group with an Islamist agenda, got involved only on day 3, that, says Mamdouh Ramzi, is part of the plan.
The Muslim Brotherhood will appear when they're sure the presidency will fall, and when they have the support and power to control everything. They work in every Arab country. They're there below the surface.
And they're there now, talking with the government. And their supporters are here, shouting on the streets. In 2 weeks of demonstrations, their rallying call hasn't changed. Step down Mubarak. Ahmed and 11 of his friends travelled for 48 hours to get here. They've come all the way from Eritrea to be part of what they believe is the new revolution sweeping the Middle East.
I was in Eritrea and I watched everything on TV. I wish I was here before, but coming here now is my contribution.
I'm asking all my brothers in Egypt to express their opinion without fear. We will never leave the blood of our martyrs who were killed in this revolution without revenge.
The Brotherhood gets some of its funding from Iran, and Tehran is already cashing in. Its foreign minister says the protests show the need for an overhaul in the region, and Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has called the protests an Islamic awakening.
There's an opportunity for an increased role for Muslims in the international arena from a political and an economic perspective for the first time in quite a long while.
6 years ago, the American National Intelligence Council, which is linked to the CIA, warned of exactly this. It mapped out a report on the global future. It consisted of a caliphate, one big Muslim state, created through social unrest, a slowdown in the economy, and fueled by religious movements.
If such a pan-regional union did genuinely come into being, such a regional union would necessitate the breaking of very strong, very resistant bonds that exist between the US and many of the participants in such a putative Arab-Muslim world.
For sure, if the Muslim Brotherhood reach the top of Egypt, they will impose their special agenda. They'll go ahead to establish a religious state. And despite them saying they don't want to be in the government, they do. They want to rule Egypt.
And it's not just Egypt, many fear.
Much of the Arab world today is saying if it can happen in the streets of Cairo, perhaps it can happen here. So democracy does seem to be spreading.
So as the Brotherhood sits down for talks with a government it despises, it's not just Egypt's future that's at stake, but so too that of the region.
2 weeks ago, if you would have asked anyone here whether they could envisage the Muslim Brotherhood sitting down with the government and talking, it would have been unthinkable. That just gives you an indication of how far this country has come in a fortnight.
Today we learned that the Muslim Brotherhood has decided to participate, which suggests that they are now involved in the dialogue that we have encouraged. We're going to wait and see how this develops, but we've been very clear about what we expect.
What is significant is that it has been agreed that a committee will be established to study constitutional reform, and that this committee has been given a deadline of 1 month in which to deliver its findings. It has also been agreed that the state of emergency here will be lifted.
On Al Jazeera, Egypt's new Vice President Omar Suleiman has agreed to set up a committee which will consider constitutional reforms, but opposition figures aren't satisfied by what's on offer, and nor are the protesters. Lines on Al Jazeera. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak has repeated his determination to stay on as president. He said he would delegate responsibility to Vice President Omar Suleiman, and on the country's emergency laws, he said they would be lifted when the time is right. Liberation Square jubilation quickly turned to anger. During the speech, protesters began shouting for the Egyptian president to leave and began waving shoes in the air. It had been widely anticipated that Hosni Mubarak would stand down.
The government is keen to show it's serious about one thing: getting life back to normal. Banks opened for 3 hours for the first time in almost 2 weeks. Business owners welcome the move.
I'm sure that if Mubarak leaves today, they still will not go home, because there are groups within them that want us to become like Tunisia or Iraq.
The protesters in Tahrir Square can stay there. We want them to stay there, isolated in their own bubble, but for the rest of us, life will go on.
This movement, young people have played a tremendously important role. And in Tahrir Square and everything, everywhere in the movement, in other cities, I mean, and so the young people, youth movement is playing a very, very central, very important role. Organizations like the April 6th Youth Movement, which was founded in 2008, in the origin is a solidarity with the huge wave of worker strikes that was happening at the time. This movement has been instrumental, actually, in initiating the present protests in Egypt, and are still playing a major role. And other movements are there, and they have recently formed a coordination committee in Tahrir Square of what they call the wrath, the revolution of wrath, and that they have this kind of representative committee of various sectors of the young people involved in the movement, and they are exerting a real pressure, which is felt in and translated in the way the other forces of the opposition, those who went into these negotiations with Suleiman, including the Muslim Brotherhood, were not in a comfortable position. And they had to, multiply statements to the tune of saying, nothing can be done without the Shabab. The Shabab means the young people. And this formula has been very much repeated. It's a testimony to the weight and importance of these young people in the mobilization. That's probably the most striking development in the political, on the political scene in Egypt.
In the next segment of our interview,
I mentioned the April 6 movement in my introduction. It started as an Egyptian Facebook group in spring 2008 to support the workers in an industrial town who were planning to strike on April 6. Activists called on participants to wear black, stay home that day. Bloggers and citizen journalists used Facebook, Twitter, Flickr, blogs and other new media tools to report on the strike, alert their networks about police activity, organize legal protection and draw attention to their efforts. With me now is Yusuf Al-Baz of the April 6th movement. Yusuf, welcome to the show. As I introduced the April 6th movement there, and it is one of the important components of this revolution, it sounded like a left-wing organization. Is that how you would describe yourself? What is the political orientation?
We can see the association because obviously we started off as not the originators of this revolution, but as the vehicle to get the snowball effect, to really consolidate support behind it. And of course, the origins were a workers' movement in the city of Mahalla, where people were really struggling to live on substandard government wages. In terms of our sort of political orientation, political reform. It's a reformist agenda. We are too young, too immature to sort of develop our own theology and sort of our movement forward. That has to be given time. We understand that. We're mature enough to understand that. So the first step is a reform.
Came from Vice President Omar Suleiman on state television.
أيها المواطنون في هذه الظروف العصيبة.
In these difficult circumstances that the country is passing through, President Mohammed Hosni Mubarak has decided to step down from his post as President of the Republic
تخليه عن منصب رئيس الجمهورية
and has empowered the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces to manage the affairs of the country.
المسلحة.
He ended the statement with the words, "May God help everyone."
By Egyptians.
And yet, to many of these people, the fact that Egypt continues to be run by the army for the foreseeable future, the fact that even the civilian side of the government in Egypt was actually inherited from the Mubarak regime, many of them are described as his cronies. How concerned are you about that being either the reality or the perception?
This have to be gone. 62-year-old Salma is telling us why she objects to the new military rule when angry men tried to shout her down. We took her to a quieter street near Tahrir where we thought it was safe to talk. I believe the new Egypt, but I not believed by the same system before. Still, all the ministry and most of them from before.
And, you know, revolutions in and of themselves don't produce the outcome that is sought. It is, okay, now that you've achieved the goal of changing the government, what happens next? That is where Egypt is, and that is what the Egyptian people have to lead us through.